Hi, I'm Thomas Bowles, Prince William County Agricultural Extension Agent. Welcome to our video.
Good morning, everyone. It's 11 o'clock. We're going to get started here. My name is Thomas Bowles. I'm the agriculture agent here in Prince William County. Welcome to this week's class. This week we have The Planting and Care of Trees by Jan Rice, who is a master gardener. And Jen will be talking about all things trees. So Jen, when you're ready, go ahead and take it away.
Good morning, everyone. I have been a master gardener for several years. Trees remain my favorite thing. Today, remind everyone that trees have been a part of our lives in literature, and they're very prominent in mythology and religion. I won't take the time to read this, but if you look that up, if you just even Google trees in religion and mythology, you get a wealth of information. Trees are very adaptive. When densely planted, they'll have a smaller canopy. If they have better soil, they will have a larger root system. If they get less light, then they produce thinner leaves, more light, thicker leaves. They're incredibly adaptive creatures. They're the longest living life form. Some live for thousands of years, and they have existed on Earth for 370 million years, which is very impressive and far beyond most living things. They store 80% of the carbon in the world, which makes them very, very important to us and our lives. Climate change is recorded in their rings, which is why we know so much about how the climate has changed over the years. And trees form structure in your garden, hopefully not in the way this picture shows a tree overgrowing a temple. The oldest living tree that we know of is a bristlecone pine in the mountains of California. It's over 5,000 years old. There's a yew in Wales that's over 4,000 years old. It was worshipped, the Druids worshipped the yews. Compare that to the oldest animal. The oldest living animal is an 183-year-old tortoise, but the oldest living human was only 122 years old. It's humbling. Now, why do we want to plant trees? Probably the biggest reason is they provide habitat for birds, mammals, and insects. Well, not to mention the fact that they help us breathe. Trees create beauty. They contribute to our health and well-being. Without trees, humans could very likely not exist. Trees are an investment in our future, and caring for them is very, very important because of what they provide for us, not just shade and beauty and aesthetics, but the oxygen they provide, the protection they provide for the soil. They do an amazing lot for us. Now, what would happen if you just stopped mowing your lawn? It would be a succession. First, the grass and weeds would grow tall. If you live in an HOA like I do, the HOA would complain at you. But eventually, small trees would begin to sprout. And then larger hardwood species would grow between these smaller trees. It takes a long time to create a forest. It doesn't happen overnight. But in a few years, you would have the beginnings of another forest. In a forest that's been established, openings can be created by a fire, such as in California and in the West. Wind can blow down numbers of trees, and ice can also put such a burden on trees, especially if it comes early in the season when the leaves are still on, bring down a number of trees, and then a gap occurs. This picture is a pipeline, but a gap similar to this, and then the process starts all over again. The seedlings show up, and eventually the forest reestablishes itself. It's an amazingly adaptive system. So birds are one of our really most important animal groups, and they depend on the trees for most of their life. Different birds live at different levels. Some of them live above the canopy, some hide in the canopy like the owls and woodpeckers. And then there's the mid-story trees, which have creepers, chickadees, nuthatches, animals, birds in that family. And then in the understory, you get wrens, doves, our lovely bluebirds. And on the ground, you can find sparrows, robins, waterfowl, junco. So they're very, very important part of the landscape for our birds. Now, trees play a really, really important role in cleaning up the mess that we humans make. They can absorb pollutant gases. They can filter particles out of the air. They absorb carbon dioxide just as a normal part of their living. And they store that carbon and release it back into the air. It's why it's so, when a forest is destroyed by, say, a wildfire, it's so destructive because so much of that carbon is released back into the air. Trees allow the water to filter slowly through the soil rather than runoff. And I know everyone has seen an instance where things have been stripped of their of the greenery, the trees or the plants, and then erosion takes place. It's why, if I mention California a lot, it's because my daughter lives there. In California, where the trees have been decimated by wildfires, they have huge landslides where the soil just crashes down off the hillsides. They're an incredible force, and shrubs can do the same thing, but they don't have the strong root systems. Now, trees can communicate. These are two excellent books that I highly recommend you read. Finding the Mother Tree by Suzanne Simard. She was a forester in Canada who did some of the original research, which showed that trees can connect to each other through underground mycorrhizal networks. They can send distress signals through when drought, disease, and insect hit the forest. They share water and nutrients. A homeowner near me just recently said when a tree died on his property that he thought they died because the trees were in competition with each other. And actually, it's sort of the opposite. Trees die when they don't have their neighbors to help and protect them. The fungi can take up the sugars and return it to the tree. And they take up the nutrients from the tree, and then they provide nitrogen, phosphorus, and minerals back to the tree. And young saplings survive through this network, which is why I think we have such trouble reestablishing artificial groves of trees, because they don't have the parent trees there to support them. They also communicate through the air via pheromones. Now, one of the most important things that you need to do before you even start is, what kind of soil do you have? Do you have soil with a complex structure that has inorganic matter, has bacteria, has insects, has plant roots, organic decaying matter in it? Or do you have poor compacted soil with less than 1% organic, where the water runs off and minerals are unavailable? If you don't have the soil, you won't be able to grow plants. So, and many people, especially in new housing developments where the soil has been compacted by all the bulldozers, you're going to have very, very poor soil. Or the other thing is the builder has removed all the soil, sold it, and left you with nothing. So that's the first thing to think about when you start to think about planting trees. So test your soil. We recommend that you test soil every 3 years to check the pH. You do that for your lawn. It's also important for other plants in your environment. So in Prince William County, you can send an email with your name and address to mastergardener@pwcgov.org. And this will be at the end of the presentation as well. So if you don't catch it here, we can mail you a kit and you can send it in for $10. If you live in another Virginia county, you should check with your local extension office, and in other states, check with your state extension office. But this is available throughout the United States. And many people say to me, oh, I have clay soil, I can't grow anything. Well, that's not strictly true. Clay soil does have a lot of nutrients and minerals in it, but it may need to have more organic matter added. And if it's heavily compacted, that's the main problem. So check your drainage to see, is it compacted? And this is examples from my community of heavily compacted soil. You can dig a hole and then put some water in it and then check it to see how fast the water drains. If it isn't draining less than an inch an hour, that's a very bad site to try and plant a tree. Think before you plant. These are examples from my neighborhood. If you plant too close to a doorway, you're going to have to keep it trimmed back. If you plant too close to your windows, or a fence, you can see what happens. On the lower right, you see my house. When I bought it, it had this tiny little crepe myrtle, and the picture with the big crepe myrtle is what it looks like now. It has completely engulfed my house. So I don't take it down because it's a tree and it provides shelter and shade, but it definitely should not have been planted where it was planted. So if you're going to plant, if you have a large space, which I don't, but think about arranging it. You may want more than one tree. You may want to group them together. Just as we've said, trees communicate, and it doesn't have to be the same species. It can be a variety of species. But again, don't plant them too close together. Notice the center picture, which was planted by the builder. They've stuck a sycamore in the middle of these eastern red cedars. Now they're thriving. They're all doing fine. But ideally, they should have had a little more space to spread out. Creating an island with a mix of shrubs and trees is also a good idea. Do your research. Trees have different needs. These are a couple of sources. You can find many in the public library. If you just Google trees, you'll find books on trees, you'll find lots of them. The Common Native Trees of Virginia is actually a free PDF online. And the Missouri Botanical Garden Plant Finder is a good resource, as is the North Carolina State Extension Gardener Plant Toolbox. That's such a mouthful to me when I try and say it. You don't need to write these down right now. I will have a bibliography at the end of this presentation, and you can request a copy from us. You do want to check for disease and pest resistance. Now, if you want something that will have the best disease and pest resistant, native trees are a good source. You can find, for Northern Virginia, you can find them in Plant Nova Natives. If you just Google Plant Nova Natives, you will find their resource. And this booklet is available online as well. Native plants make a difference because they provide habitat for our native birds and insects. A lot of the imported trees you will find have more, they have less pest resistance, and they often do not support the caterpillars which feed our baby birds and provide our birds with food. So here's a few examples. These are two trees for smaller spaces. The serviceberry, which is native to Eastern North America. Now, again, when I say smaller spaces, I have a townhouse. I really don't have room for even these small ones. Maybe the sweet bay magnolia, probably not the serviceberry, because it can spread to 20 feet wide. In a smaller space, it probably won't likely be that big. But so this is one that likes full sun to part shade. Both of these do. The sweet bay magnolia likes wet feet, doesn't mind wet feet. So that's a good one to plant if you have poorer drainage. But the serviceberry prefers to have drier situations. And these are a couple of other ones. These are also in my neighborhood, the eastern redbud and the wax myrtle. Wax myrtle provides food for birds. It isn't as affected by the deer. We have a lot of deer in our community, and these are not eaten by them. The eastern redbud provides lots of pretty flowers. It loves full sun, but it will take part shade. It's very important that you recognize and take into account the amount of shade in your situation. These are two more, the American holly. It can go to 30 feet, so the fact that I've listed it for smaller spaces. But if it's kind of crowded in a smaller space, it may not get that tall. The American smoke tree is one of my favorite. It has beautiful purple color. It's not bothered by the deer. It needs full sun though. Two more trees for smaller spaces. One of my favorites is the flowering dogwood and then the witch hazel. The flowering dogwood does suffer from anthracnose. So there is a variety called Cornus cusa, which is more resistant to that. So you can consider that. It's not the native one, but if you're concerned about anthracnose, then that might be one to choose. It's another one. It'll tolerate black walnut. Now, most of you, if you live in smaller developments, do not need to worry about black walnut, but the black walnut has secretes something called juglone, which prevents some trees from growing in the vicinity of it. But black walnuts are usually in forests and not in suburban habitats. The witch hazel can get to 30 feet, but it's not likely to get that tall in a smaller spot. It likes full sun to part shade. Again, the deer don't seem to bother it very much. Now we get into large spaces. These would be ones if you have a community where you have open areas and you want them to fill up the trees. The oak is probably the best choice because it provides so much food for so many different insect and birds. It provides shade for the birds, and of course it provides acorns, food for our beloved squirrels. The pin oak is one that grows taller and narrower. The white oak is one that provides the best number of species, the largest number of species. I highly recommend this book by Doug Ptolemy, The Nature of Oaks. If you don't have time to read this book, you can go to YouTube, and he has plenty of different videos where he talks about why trees are so important and why the oak tree in particular is very important for our environment. These are another large ones, the eastern red cedar and the sweet gum, not quite as large as the oaks. I think the eastern red cedar often gets maligned because some people feel it's not as beautiful as a spruce or a pine, but it provides shelter and food for birds. It will tolerate just about anything, shallow, rocky, clay soil, drought, pollution. It is a workhorse. The negative to it is you can't plant it near apple or quince trees because it is a host for disease that bothers actually all fruit trees, cedar apple rust. So you want to be careful if you have apple trees that you want to continue producing apples, don't have that tree. The sweet gum is gorgeous in the fall. It can get very tall. It has pretty blooms in the spring. It loves full sun, but it's very tolerant of a lot of different situations. The downside to it is its seed pods are very prickly and it can get very messy. I had several of these in my previous location and you didn't want to go out under them in bare feet. So the river birch, if you have a place that has a lot of water that you want sucked up, can't go wrong with a river birch. But a lot of people don't like it because it is messy. It sheds a lot of small sticks and leaves. It can get very tall. You don't see them very tall in suburban environments very much, but they can be very large. And I had to include sassafras, even though they're very hard to find and they are a little more difficult to get to grow, but they are gorgeous trees. I had one at the place I lived before. I heard from the current owner that it has since bitten the dust, but it was one of my favorite trees, and so I had to include it. The red maple, if you want fall color, Acer rubrum will provide you with gorgeous color most years. You can have varying climate situations which make it less vibrant, but they're very, very beautiful. And the bitternut hickory is sort of an ignored tree because it isn't very common, but it's also a beautiful tree and provides hickory nuts for some of the wildlife. The tulip poplar, if you're going to put a tulip poplar on American beach, I suggest not in a small suburban yard. I would say an acre or more before you try one of these. They are huge. They're fabulous trees, but very, very large. Again, think before you plant. So the willow, if you live in a small suburban situation, you do not plant a willow because it can tear up pipes. And if you have a septic field, as far away from that septic field as you can possibly plant it. Pines are in decline in our area. due to the warming of the climate. This picture in the upper right is one in our neighborhood, an Austrian pine, that's since gone, but it did not survive the hot summer nights and the drought. The black walnut, I mentioned that earlier, produces juglone. It can kill some plants. So if you have a large plot and you want that, then just do research of what will survive around it. Spruce is prone to rhizosphere. The Leland cypress can grow 100 feet tall and get very leggy and rangy. The ash and the fringe tree can grow, can attract the emerald ash borer. A lot of the ash trees in the Manassas area are gone. You'll see whole stands of them. If you see large stands of dead trees, they're probably ash that died from the emerald ash borer. It can affect the fringe tree. I'm hopeful that the fringe tree, which is native to Virginia, will be our savior and that they will eventually resist this. The ornamental cherry, which I have a picture here in the lower left, that one is disease prone. Fruit trees have an amazing dividend and they're wonderful, but just be aware they're a lot of work. They have many pests and diseases. And there is a Virginia Tech publication, Tree Fruit in the Home Garden, which can give you more information about that. These are invasive species that we recommend you don't plant. The Bradford pear, the tree of heaven. The tree of heaven is attracting that nasty new pest, the spotted lanternfly, the mimosa or silk tree, the royal paulownia, Norway maple, the white poplar, chinaberry, mulberry, paper mulberry. Mulberry is everywhere. If you know what to look for, you can see it everywhere. The birds love the food and they spread it. So where do you buy a tree? Any reputable nursery. There are some native plant nurseries. You can find these. We're not recommending individual nurseries. You need to do your research, but you can research native plant nurseries online and find them. Reputable nurseries do sell invasive species, and buying online may not be your best option because it may not arrive in good condition for planting. Another source of trees is just your yard. All four of these different species, a sycamore, a tulip poplar, a maple, and an oak, all came up in my yard. But as I said, I live in a townhouse, so unfortunately I had to roust them. I did try to replant some of them in our open areas, but if you just look around, you can see an amazing. If you want to create your own seedlings, you can do it through hardwood cuttings. I'm not going to go into it here, but Clemson University has a fact sheet on it, and that is in the bibliography that we will provide to you. What to look for? You want a sapling with a flexible trunk. This is why going to a nursery is better than buying online, because you can actually see what you're getting. You don't want one that's root bound, and it may not be as easy to see if it's in the pot. These are pictures of what's taken out of the pot, but if you see circling roots, bad sign. You want to be able to see the root flare. And this picture at the bottom indicates how if it's too deep in the pot, it can't breathe and it's probably not going to survive in the long run. You want one that you don't see ropes cutting into the bark. You don't want damaged bark and broken branches. And you want one with a single leader. I'll talk more about that in a bit. Now, when do you plant? You plant late in the fall or early winter because the tree is not spending time putting out leaves. It is putting all its effort into growing its roots. And as this Malay proverb tells you, a tree with strong roots laughs at storms. New trees can take a beating in the summer heat. In the fall and winter, their energy goes into root growth, as I mentioned. And in the spring and summer, it requires a lot of extra moisture. And you can plant then, but you're going to have to monitor that tree and water, 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 water. I'll talk about watering in another slide. Now, before you plant, be sure you call Miss Utility. You do not want to hack into a gas line or any other utility. The hole is far more important than anything else you do before you plant. You want that hole to be 2 to 4 times as wide as the root ball. Wide, but not deep. If it's more heavily compacted, the wider you need to make it. The depth should be shallower than the root ball. You can leave a pedestal in the center of your hole of the soil, the strong soil, that will balance the tree. You want to score the sides of the hole so that just by chopping into it with your shovel, you're going to leave a solid pedestal, and then that will allow the tree to be steady when you place it in the hole. You're going to remove everything. Now, I'm going to put a caveat here. I just talked to an experienced landscaper who says, be very, very careful. If you remove everything and the root ball falls apart, it very likely may kill the tree. But a lot of the fiber burlap that you see is not natural. It's manufactured, it's plastic really. And so you do want to get that burlap off. A long time ago, trees were wrapped in jute burlap that was natural and would decay, but that's not true as much today. You don't want any encircling roots in place to prevent girdling. You want to, you can trim the edges in this picture in the lower left. You will see them using a handsaw to kind of cut the edges of the roots to encourage them to spread out. You want to make sure, I can't say this often enough, keep the root flare above ground level. Every community, if you took a walk in your community, you will see tree after tree planted where the root flare is not visible. Those trees are going to die. They won't die now, today, but they will die sooner than normal because of that. Now, here's what we mean by the root flare. You can see this at the bottom, and this shows how you want to have that backfill. You don't need to add amendments because the tree will just go, oh, look, food. I don't need to go anywhere to seek food. You want the tree to spread out to seek nutrients. So you don't want to put fertilizer, manure in the hole. You want to put the loose soil back around the tree and pack it down 2 or 3 inches, gently pack it, then add some water, pack it again, add some water. Water, 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 key to everything. Oh, and don't use sand. Much as people think it increases drainage, it does not. So mulching, again, root flare. This is correct. The one that has the red check, you should be able to see that root flare. It's okay to put mulch around a tree. You don't want it to look like this red mulch in the bottom. You can see this poor little dogwood has had it. It's kicking the bucket. And it's because it's been engulfed in that mulch and it can't breathe. Trees' roots need to breathe. I can't emphasize that enough. So leave 2 inches around the trunk so that insects and pests can't burrow under that mulch. Voles just love to come and munch on roots. And if you've got heavy mulch going up to the tree, that provides them shelter from hawks that want to eat them. Don't put plastic under the mulch. This prevents the roots from getting the water and air that they need. If they're on the surface and you're having trouble mowing around them, you can lightly cover them with mulch or leave them bare and don't mow around them. Mowers and weed whackers do as much damage as anything else. You can leave the leaves. I know some homeowners, communities on HOAs don't like you to do this. But if you bring the leaves out to the center of your lawn, run the lawnmower over and over them, and then spread them, that's the best mulch you can have. You don't have to do bark mulch that's been shredded. You can do shade-tolerant plants, ferns, bleeding heart, hostas, wild violets, wild ginger, tiarella, which is foam flower. These will all grow happily under your tree, and then you can mulch lightly around them. But if you put enough, I don't even mulch around my one tree because I have the wild ginger under mine. I have violets. I have green and gold, which I should have added to the list. I have green and gold under mine. And they don't have deep root systems. They coexist very happily with the tree. Do not plant grass under your tree. This is an example in my neighborhood, mostly because it's going to compete with the tree, and the tree is going to win eventually. This tree is too small. It's not out competing the grass, but eventually it will. English ivy, pachysandra, vinca, ajuga are examples of things that are not good cohabitors with trees. Watering. You've heard me say this over and over again. Get a rain gauge. This rain gauge I show in the picture, I got from Amazon. I think it was under $3. Very, very cheap, but there are lots of them. I'm not saying get this one, but they're inexpensive. I have 3 of them in my tiny yard because it shows where, how much water different things have gotten. Saplings need more water than older trees. And when you first start, you want to try and water at least 6 inches deep, twice a week for the first month, and then once a week for a year after you plant a tree. Young trees can go into shock. Trees don't think about their natural environment. Naturally, they would be seated, they would start, and they would never move. But if we're going to plant saplings, choose a young one, because a young one, they go through a process. Sleep, creep, leap is what we call it. So at first, they kind of go into the storm and see where they go. Oh my gosh, what happened? And then they start to grow, and that's what we call creep. They grow slowly at first, sort of tentatively. And then by the 3rd year, their growth will just explode. If you plant a younger tree, this process goes more quickly. It will take less time. You will find if you plant an older tree, it may be slower at developing than a younger tree that you've planted that may exceed the growth of that older tree. So thinking that, well, I'll just plant this tree that has a, 3 or 4 inch diameter trunk is better because I'm going to get shade faster, that may not be the case. If you're going to be away and it's in the summer, you can use gaiters, but make sure you use them temporarily. You'll see them in communities where they lie collapsed against the bark, and that's not good. You have to maintain them. You have to put the water in regularly and then remove it when you can get back to watering it yourself on a regular basis. Just remember this, by the time that tree shows stress, the damage is done, and you will probably not be able to revive it. Now, as the tree gets older, you still need to make sure it's watered. Many people think, oh, the roots are really deep, I don't need to water. If you have a drought in the summer, water that tree. And some trees need more water. The maple is an example. Its roots are very close to the surface. They will dry out quickly. You can, if it's on a slope and you need more water, you can build a berm. Lawn irrigation, don't depend on your sprinkler system, because your lawn needs 1 inch of water a week in 2 half-inch doses. A tree can benefit much more from having a single, strong, deep watering. Another thing to protect from, if you live in an area that's prone to animal damage, and actually even in areas that are not prone to it, you can have it. So put a cage around. You just have to remember to take it off when it gets older and strong enough. But deer can rub their antlers on the trunk, stripping away the bark. They can eat the bark in the winter. They can decimate whole forests of seedlings. Humans do as much damage as animals. This damage is from pesticides, string trimmers, and lawnmowers. If those lawnmowers hit that bark and it starts to peel off, you're in real trouble. So mulch widely. Don't run your string trimmers anywhere near close to the trees. To stake or not to stake, you will see this, especially when trees are planted by landscapers. They'll put on stakes. Studies have shown that trees without stakes will grow faster, establish roots more quickly, and have sturdier trunks because the wind swaying the tree stimulates growth hormones and causes that tree to develop more strongly. Young stake trees can have taller, thinner trunks, less lateral root development, and there are higher risk of the trunk breaking in a storm. But there are times when a stake is needed. If it's bare root or it has a small root ball, you may need to stake it, but be careful and stake it outside the root ball. Use padded wires. You can see damage to this tree where this was not removed. This, again, my community. Remove it after one season and make sure it's no higher than 2/3 the height of the trunk. Common causes for a tree to fail. I've mentioned these before, but I can't say it often enough. Don't plant too deeply. It deprives the tree of oxygen. Many people don't realize that trees get oxygen through the soil. Underwatering, overwatering, get root rot, overmulching. Stressed plants are subject to insect and fungal disease. Over 90% of trees planted professionally are planted improperly. This was a study that was done at Virginia Tech in 2000. Pruning. I mentioned in one slide about picking a tree with 1 leader. The first 2 pictures on the right show a single leader. The third one shows 2 leaders. You're going to need, if you have a tree with 2 leaders, you're going to need to prune one of them off. Prune carefully. You want to prune any dead or broken limbs. When you're pruning, take note and keep your pruners sterilized and clean. You can transmit diseases from one tree to another if you don't keep them clean. Keep them sharp because ragged cuts, and I'm guilty of this. Every so often I go, oh, and I notice that I've just cut something and it's a ragged cut and I have to go sharpen my tools. You can get very inexpensive carbon tool sharpeners just about anywhere. It's very simple to do. So you want to make sure that when you cut, you don't cut into the branch collar, and the diagram on the left shows you what the cut should look like. If it's small branch, it's pruners, you can cut straight. If you're using a saw, I recommend making 3 cuts so that it doesn't tear the bark of the tree. This shows what a wound healing should look like the first year, the next year, and then until the wound is completely healed. This is when it's done properly. You do not need to add sealants. The 3Ds are diseased, damaged, and dead. These are examples. Again, I just walked around my neighborhood and found these. Prune during dormancy. Don't leave stubs. That exposes the tree to more damage. And prune rubbing and cross branches. Now, once branches have grown into each other, you really can't do anything. It's done. And some trees are prone to that. Crepe myrtles are. You have to keep an eye on them. And water sprouts and suckers, that's on this tree on the right. It has a lot of suckers coming up from the bottom. You want to keep those pruned down. If you have an example of a tree like a crepe myrtle where you want several branches competing, you want, not competing, but you want several branches to grow up. So it's a group of trunks, sorry, not branches, trunks. Pick 3 to 5 strong ones and then take out everything else. After you plant, pests and diseases can damage your trees, but it isn't always fatal. So be aware and get information, get correct diagnosis before you treat. If it's an emerald ash borer, yes, there were treatments, but they discovered that the treatments were very expensive and then the trees died anyway. So you do need to have knowledge of what it is. If you see things happening, monitor your trees periodically. So for instance, the eastern red cedar that gets bagworms, if they've got 2 or 3 and they're within reach, that's easy. Pull them off, throw them in the trash. If it's covered with bagworms, you may need to treat it. And if you've left it that long, it makes it that much more difficult to resolve the problem. But not everything is a problem. The tent caterpillars in the upper picture on this black walnut, that's probably not going to hurt that at all. If it bothers you, you can bust open the net and the birds will happily devour all those caterpillars for you. Contact your local extension office. For Prince William County, it's Master Gardener at pwcgov.org. Again, it'll be in our bibliography. Now, this is one of my favorite publications of all time. When Virginia Tech redid some of their publications, I quickly checked to see if I needed to save a permanent copy of this. I've mentioned everything that's in here in this presentation, but this condenses it down in a visual form, exactly what goes wrong with trees, the things that you do to damage trees. Nothing lives forever. Even when you do your best, trees can succumb, just like humans. So if you have a tree that is small and you can cut it down easily, that's fine. But if you have a large tree, you should call an arborist, a professional arborist, not the guys that run around your neighborhood knocking on doors going, I see you have a dead tree. These 2 sites are places where you can find an arborist. Treesaregood.org, which is the international chapter, but the mid-Atlantic chapter is goodtreecare.com. And there you can put in your zip code and it will list arborists that can help you. So I'm going to say this again. Our Master Gardener Help Desk is mastergardener@pwcgov.org. Our phone number is 703-792-7747. But I will say that since the pandemic, we are not back to full-time monitoring the phone. It is monitored most days of the week. You can also find us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And this is the bibliography. I'll leave it up for a few seconds if you're the type that wants to have a screenshot. But if you want, you can email that address that I had, and we will send you a copy of this bibliography. There's several tree books in here that I heartily recommend. Peter Wallenben has another new one. Besides The Hidden Life of Trees, he has The Heartbeat of Trees. And then the Arbor Day Foundation has What Tree Is That? And Tree Finder is an excellent, it's a little booklet that you can use to identify trees. Say you move into a new home and you have a lot of trees and you don't know what they are. That's an excellent little booklet. Online resources, the Missouri Botanical Garden. It's not Virginia, so it's going to tell you native plants Missouri, but it is in Zone 7, which is interesting. So, but you can go to the Missouri Botanical Finder, look up a plant, and it has a very succinct page which shows you the potential problems and potential pests that may bother it, and it also tells you what that plant needs. It's quick and easy. And other one that's quick and easy, I mentioned this earlier, the North Carolina State Extension Gardener Plant Toolbox. Very, very good resource. Probably even more plants than the Missouri Botanical Garden because it covers plants that grow in zones beyond warmer zones, because North Carolina has some warmer zones than we do. Virginia Tech Publications, it's a new website. If you're used to the old one, the new one is resources.ext.vt.edu. And be patient with it, it's still in progress. Some of the old ones, old publications are not showing up. I think that's because they're redoing those publications. But if there's a publication or there's something you can't find a publication on, I do recommend, again, contacting our help desk, and we'll do what we can to find them, because we actually have print copies of some, and we have back ones that are not, if they're not on the website anymore, if they're still valid, we have some copies. Problem tree Free Trees for Virginia Landscapes is a good one. They do have some in there that are now being considered invasive. I think that might be one that's probably going to be up for review. We have a YouTube channel, which has lots of videos. We present about every other week now. And so all of those presentations, just like this one, will be posted on that usually by the end of the week or the beginning of the following week. The Piedmont Master Gardeners put out an excellent article, Planting a New Tree, that's still available. And that hardwood cuttings one that I mentioned from Clemson. So we have upcoming classes on November 17th is the holiday arrangements. December 8th is garden goodies. I'll be doing that one. If you're looking for interesting garden favorites, that's what we're looking for. In fact, if you have a garden favorite and want to, I haven't done the presentation yet, so if you want to include it, you can email our help desk. We'd be happy to hear from you. Winter sowing, this is a fabulous one. If you want an easy way to get your seeds started outdoors, if you have small space, but you have a deck or a sunroom or something else, a place where they'll be out of the way, you can start seeds early during the winter. It's a very popular presentation from last year. You can register at the website. Again, if you don't capture this, you can ask for our bibliography, and that's the end. If anyone has any questions, I'll be happy to answer them.
It does not look like we have any questions in the chat box. So if anybody has any questions, wants to unmute themselves and, oh, wait a minute, we do have one. What are some benefits of pruning?
Well, keeping the tree healthy, sometimes I mentioned that trees can have crossing rubbing branches. In a storm, branches can break. I had that just recently on my recently pruned crepe myrtle. During the recent windstorm, a number of branches broke. So I'm going to have to get out there with my loppers and get those branches off. And if it's diseased, if you catch something quickly, it's sometimes very easy to just take off that diseased portion. So dead, diseased, damaged, those are the reasons to prune. And one thing I didn't mention there because I didn't think it was necessarily relevant, but I probably should have, that topping trees is never a good idea. Don't whack across the top and then think it's going to do well. Some trees can tolerate it better than others. You see everybody does it to crepe myrtles, but it's far better to choose a tree that fits your landscape than having to chop the top off it every year. Did I cover everything on that, Thomas?
Yes. Let's see, we have another question about, can you talk more about the fringe tree and the emerald ash borer and the data behind it?
Yeah, the fringe tree, one of my favorites, and to be honest, I've just planted some in our community in the real hopes that it will survive. We'll keep an eye on them. They're young. Hopefully they'll be strong enough. They are a member of the ash tree family. So while the emerald ash borer is going to prefer the ash trees, if they kill off all the ash trees, other members of the ash family are going to be potentially susceptible. So at the moment, and Thomas, correct me if I'm incorrect here, it's not widespread, but I felt I needed to mention it because it is a member of the ash family. It's also a smaller tree, so it would be easier for you to monitor it and to watch for signs of it and to treat it. It's very hard to treat very tall, large trees. Is there something you want to add to that, Thomas? Because
No, I think you covered it.
Okay.
That's the last question we have in the chat box.
Okay, appreciate your time today. And thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Jan. We'll see everyone next week or in 2 weeks. Everybody have a good day.
If you enjoyed this video, please let us know with your questions, comments, and suggestions for other classes and videos. For more information on lawns and gardens, please contact the Extension Horticulture Help Desk at mastergardener@pwcva.gov. Thank you, and we'll see you next time.